Although we're probably live, of course. Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is the Wednesday, March 30th special meeting of the Scarborough Town Council. Call this meeting to order, and if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. And roll call.
Counselor Seither?
Here.
Counselor Anderson?
Here.
Counselor Katarina?
Here.
Counselor Hamel?
Here.
Counselor Johnson?
Here.
And Chairman Clucci?
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you. And just so everybody knows, this is a special meeting, so we are restricted to the items that were listed on the agenda. The first one is order number 22-030. Act on the request to set the date for nomination papers to be available to fill a vacancy on the town council created by the resignation of Paul Johnson. with the term to expire in 2024 from Thursday, March 31st, 2022 to close of business on Wednesday, April 6th, 2022. And set the special municipal election date for Tuesday, June 14th, 2022 to coincide with the state primary election and the school budget validation referendum election. And this is being brought forward by the town clerk. And would you like to introduce it, Tony?
Thanks. As noted in the order, I'm requesting that council sets the timeframe for the nomination papers, which they can do pursuant to 802. Also pursuant to section 211, that addresses the vacancies and special elections. In this order, it's requesting that the date of the special election be set to coincide with the next regular town election, which is the school budget validation and the primary election. I made the request with the voters in mind, and it appeared logical. Having two elections so close in proximity would have, I felt, resulted in confusing the voters and negative impact on overall voter turnout. Also, the cost of having two elections as well. I just didn't think that it would, and we have that chance to hold it on one election, and I just want to thank the council for their consideration.
Well, thank you. And I'll just add that, yeah, this is how it was brought forward. We didn't have a lot of time. We weren't anticipating Paul's resignation in quite the way. We knew he was, looking at another opportunity, but we weren't sure it was going to happen, I guess, so quickly. So our default was to try to get the information out in public as quickly as we can. And it turns out we did receive some feedback from residents, and there's a couple of ways that the charter can be interpreted when it comes to this particular issue. I interpreted it the same way that Tony did when she brought it forward. There are other reasonable interpretations. So that's part of the reason we have a council here is, by approving this order, we're saying that this is the way that we're interpreting the order. So with that, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor Hamel.
Yes. So I know this is a tough one because there are a lot of interests that are being balanced and arriving at I won't say the decision, I will say the recommendation, which is what's before us. It's not really up to the chair or to staff to determine what to be done. It's up to us, the council, to determine what is to be done here. So I want to be clear. There was a legal opinion. Can we spend a minute talking about the legal opinion? As I don't believe the public has had the opportunity to see the legal opinion. Could we speak to that? Take a few minutes talking about that to begin with.
I can try. I could probably bring it up in, oh, you know what? Tom's always prepared. Okay, so Tony, can we add this to the record for the meeting?
Yes, we can.
The legal opinion? I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Basically, the way that we're interpreting it, or the way that it's being brought forward is defendable, it's reasonable, but it's not the only way that it can be interpreted and read.
So if I may ask just a follow-up question on that. So that basically means that we were not required to do it this way. With this recommendation, we could have made a recommendation that would have gone the other way, that would say to do it right away, to do it as soon as possible. Isn't that true?
I would say that a reasonable person could suggest that. The way I read the charter, it would not conform with the charter. I didn't ask a legal opinion for an earlier date. I just asked for, what he provided was on the way it's being proposed. Is that? Councillor Katarina?
Yeah, with all due respect to my fellow counselors or counselor, I look at this as this is the next regular town election, which would fit into the charter because we do the school budget as part of June 14th. So to me, it's a no-brainer that we would do the election on this date. In addition, as the clerk mentioned, it costs money to run elections. So I know there was someone from the public was like, well, you should be doing it with 60 days, which was, I don't know, a week before, 10 days before. May 23rd, I think, was the date that was thrown out there, which I think's unreasonable. And I kind of looked at it and went, wait a minute, I thought that these were some people who wanted to save the town money, but that's another story. So I would say let's just stick with the June 14th. It makes sense. People will pull papers. I already know of people, more than one, who are gonna pull papers and let them go out there, campaign and get elected. So.
Any other discussion?
I had a follow-up, if I may, John. So whenever somebody begins, with all due respect to somebody, you know that you gotta kind of prepare for. But I appreciate the comment and thanks for the wind-up. So there are good reasons, as I look at this, for doing what's being recommended. There are certainly efficiency reasons. There are good reasons in terms of turnout. There are a host of good reasons, however, if we view the town council, a fully staffed town council, as the elected representatives of the public whom we serve directly, if you look on the org chart, the public is on the top of the org chart, followed by the town council, followed by the town manager and staff. It's not any other way around. What processes did we follow to try to confirm that this is the best way for us to serve the interests of the public? Other than a special meeting that's here, and we know that events happen when you're busy making plans, and we had no control over that. Happened suddenly.
So I'd be happy to go over this. So I found out about Paul's resignation, I don't know, sometime in the morning, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock. And I immediately requested that the town, one, make the public aware that we would be having this meeting tonight to determine election date, and 2, that there would be a vacancy on the council. And that the details would be forthcoming. I did request at that time that we publish the agenda earlier than regular. The regular time would have been Friday. I was hoping that it would go out on a Wednesday. The resignation happened on a Wednesday. It went out on Thursday. And I think because there were some T's being dotted and there was some research going on. When I got the proposed agenda, I read it. I made some phone calls and there was some general support for the way it's being brought forward today. If there wasn't, we would have changed it and brought it forward a different way. It's still subject to amendment. It's still subject to comment by the public and into final approval. But that's the way that we're positioning it, that we're bringing it forward, because it had the most support.
So with that, I'd just like to say my position on this. I would be in favor of supporting the proposal that's put forward, if and only if there would be assurances that no major decision would come before the council is back to full complement. And we already have one issue that's not going to be handled that way. It's going to be voting on the budget. Okay, that is something that would not have a full complement, a fully staffed town council to vote on that. So whoever gets elected, and we're assuming that would be a reflection of how the public feels right now, real here and now, that individual, whoever that lucky person may be, will not have the opportunity to vote on that.
Yeah, I mean, our job is to meet and conduct business. It's not in the cards to say that this is important and this is not important. And, I don't think that would be lawful for us to do that. And I can't say I'm not going to hold any meetings between now and when we have an election. I don't think that would be appropriate either. Sorry, Councilor Snyder and Anderson, you both had your hands up.
I mean, I think we're being a little vague about our 2 options here, and I'm not really sure why we're being vague. Jean Marie absolutely has the date correct, as far as I understood it. 60 days from Councillor Johnson's resignation would be May 23rd. So the options before us are a definition that we got from legal as to whether the June election is a regular election in the town of Scarborough, or whether the November election is the only regular election in the town of Scarborough. The legal interpretation is that since June has been a regular referendum in this town for a number of years, that we could use June as a regular election, and we could host the election on June 14th as opposed to May 23rd. As a point of clarification in terms of major decisions, as of right now, the second reading of the budget is scheduled for May 18th, which would be before the May 23rd election date. And so it's going to be the 6 of us unless that date were to change. And I'm not comfortable suggesting that we need to change the date of the second reading to accommodate being down 1 counselor. I feel like then we're making all kinds of decisions, that aren't necessarily of a representative body.
As a practical matter, there's one regular meeting between May 23rd
Okay.
and June 14th for the council.
But it's not the budget.
No,
It's not second reading of the budget.
it's just the June 6th meeting.
But I want just a point of clarification. So Counselor Snyder is correct that the next, so we have confirmed legally that the next regularly scheduled election is June, not November. But that does not mean that we would not also have the option of setting an election between now and then. Is that what I understand that is within our authority to do that? And that needs to be a discussion before us.
If that was on the table, that's something that we could run, by legal.
Well, it's on the table because you've made a recommendation and you've decided, or someone has
So we have a
decided.
motion on the table. Don, if you want a motion to amend it or move to amend it, that's within your purview to do so. And then we can discuss any potential amendments. But right now, what we have on the table is pretty specific that it's June 14th.
So we have a special meeting. Part of the special meeting is to discuss the option of having a special election. Okay, the action before us has not been worded that way. Okay, so there's a couple of things that have happened by virtue of the timing of this.
But the action isn't a discussion. The action is to actually take action to establish the date for the municipal election. And you as a counselor can offer an amendment to the action that's before us. And then we can get a second and have a discussion about the amendment that you're proposing.
Yeah, my preference is to have a more robust discussion about this and not just do it in the context of a special meeting that was called without a lot of public notice, number one, and also without a lot of public education about the details of how that decision, how we arrived at that
So we
decision.
could never fill it. I mean, we don't, right. So it would, to me, it'd be a violation of the charter to sit on our heels and not proactively try to fill policy.
My bias is to staff it as soon as humanly possible within reason, okay? We're not talking about never. okay?
When do you want to fill it?
This is discussion.
I think we should have some discussion over when could we have an earlier election, number one, and number two, would it be fair to candidates, to the public, and to the council? And we've not had that
So
discussion.
the best way to have that discussion is to make a motion to amend the date, amend the order that's before us, and then we have a discussion about it. That's totally acceptable. But somebody has to offer that motion.
I would like to offer that motion.
And what date would you like to amend it to? How would you like?
I
it to
would
be?
like it to be the date that would, an option for us to discuss an earlier date than the one that's been proposed. The first of it, the earliest available date. And I understand it's like 6 weeks from the date of the resignation. Is that right? That an election could be held to backfill the vacancy.
The charter is clear. It has to be held within 60 days of the vacancy. The date of May 23rd has been discussed. I believe that maybe that's the 60th day.
That's the
I don't think
60th day.
it's wise necessarily to choose that day. One concern, just to be aware of, is that you would potentially have overlapping absentee periods, which I think could be challenging for the electorate. And the way to avoid
Overlapping
that-
absentee periods of,
As a point of order, he needs to make his motion, please. This
Sure.
is, you have
well,
to
we will
pick a
have an opportunity
day.
for discussion once we move it forward, right? Even for the new motion that's been proposed.
You need to make your
have to
amended
articulate the
motion.
Don. So it has to be something that we can reasonably interpret before we can give us that.
Well, I'm asking the town manager what that date would be. And I'm also suggesting that dates that we have in the budget could be moved. Okay, we can move budget dates around in terms of voting
Sure
dates
we
in
can,
order
but
to,
We're not talking about the budget dates right now. We're talking about setting a special election to fill Paul's seat. And we're proposing setting it for June 14th. You can change any of these dates. You can change some of the specifics. A lot of them were thought through before they were brought to us and before I brought it to the council. But they're absolutely subject to amendment, but you have to actually say what you want to amend, what you want to change. Okay, good. Well, Counselor Anderson.
If there's no motion on the table, I'm just gonna talk to the current,
Okay.
what's on the table. So I hear Counselor Hamill's perspective. However, I think based on the legal opinion that we got back, because my discomfort when this first came forward was the information we got from the private citizen, who I thought raised a good point and interpreted the charter differently. After getting it back from legal, I feel very comfortable that the date we set, based on what Tody shared in terms of justification, in terms of the cost, the logistics, the confusion to the public, in addition to giving potential candidates enough time to effectively campaign, I think the date that we have is the good date, and that's the date I would be supportive in moving forward. I think we could have done it earlier, but again, I think for all those reasons that Tody brought up, it just feels like reasonably this is a good date to have for this particular election. So I'm supportive of what's on the table.
Counselor Katarina.
Call the question.
So I don't want to abruptly, are you ready to move on?
I'd like to make one more statement. I'd like to.
There's no more discussion. on the
Well, listen,
question.
I'm going to be the poster child for calling of the question, okay? So I should at least be entitled the opportunity to speak. And I plan to do that. If you want to do it after the vote, that's fine. But or if I have to do it in counselor comments,
Why
or
don't
if I
you-
have to get up and do it at the podium as a private citizen, I will do that.
Don, I was affording you the opportunity to speak. Are you done?
No, I'm not. I want to say one more thing. I want to say that we have had a recent habit of having special meetings that don't occur in the public realm, that show up suddenly with no notice, and we haven't had the opportunity to discuss this. So that's the thing I'm objecting to. I'm not prepared to offer another option at this point in time, but for that reason, I will not and cannot support this at this time, based upon the process for how it got here. And I hope we're going to be done with special meetings very soon.
Very good.
Call the
Um,
question.
With that, seeing no more discussion, Tody, would you call the roll, please?
Thank you. Counselor Seider,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
No.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Chairman Clucci.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is order number 22-031. And aren't you all glad you're here tonight? Act on the council chair appointments for the finance committee as follows. April Seither is chair, Kenneth Johnson and Jonathan Anderson. And this is simply, on short notice, we lost our finance chair. I didn't think that it would be acceptable to go through the finance review process, which is really our core objective over the next month and a half, without having somebody in charge or having a full staff there. And I want to just recognize that this is not a comfortable position to put anybody in. Usually you have a little time to, work your rhythm but I am fully confident that Ms. Seither is up to the challenge and will do an excellent job in this role. And that's why I'm bringing forward this recommendation. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this? Why don't we go to them? I failed to ask for public comment on the last order, so that's fair.
Ms. Hamel, I'm gonna unmute you. Ms. Hamel, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
We can see you, Ms. Hamel, but can't hear you. Or we can see your name.
Okay,
There you
now you should, okay, I had my hand raised the entire time since the start of the meeting, so obviously you've already voted on the item and but I'd still like to just say that I agree that it seemed like a no-brainer to go ahead and have this special election or have the election on the same day as the school budget in June. But we are in the midst of reviewing the GMO exemption. request for the Downs. And this is a decision that will have a long-term impact on so much about this town, potentially adding hundreds of apartments, impacting the schools, and basically our quality of life. Granting the GMO exemption requires a majority of the town council to vote in favor. In a council of 7, that means that 5 members must vote in favor. But in a council with just 6 people, that means 4 town councilors must vote in the affirmative. So considering that this is a very weighty decision with a big impact on the town, please, I am asking this council to pledge that no vote will be taken on that GMO exemption until we're back to a full council. That's it. For the
Thank you, ma'am.
record, Susan Hamill, Bay Street and Pine Point.
Very good. Since that was in reference to the previous order, I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion and a second on order 22-03.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, any discussion? Counselor Hamel.
Yes. There were other vacancies. This is not the one on vacancies that we're voting on, right? No?
This is, it's to reconstitute the finance committee.
Right. But it raises a question about, we're doing this because Counselor Paul Johnson resigned and we're replacing him as a full voting member on the finance committee. He was also a full voting member on the ordinance committee. Now, I know that's not before us this evening, but I would like at some point for the town manager to explain how he's planning to fill those other vacancies, and what his authority is to do that. Thank
So,
you.
That's totally within my authority to nominate. And as we've discussed, as chair, I have a seat on all of our committees. And I'm going to participate in ordinance, and my vote will count because there won't be a full contingent.
So I understood that your ability to fill those vacancies was going to be only in the capacity of a non-voting member unless the council takes action to appoint you as a full voting member.
That's not the way our rules read. It's chapter 302. That's just not.
That's not what you explained to me, or my understanding of what you explained to me.
Right, you may have misunderstood me. Very good. Any other discussion?
I'm just super happy that April Scyther is stepping up to be finance chair, and I'm happy to be with you on the committee and support you through this process. And super excited to be working with Ken as well.
I'm excited to see you guys work, actually. And I may have to pinch it there as well, because I know that we have some vacations coming up this month. And I look forward to it. I think it's going to be a nice dynamic. It's going to get better. Any other discussion? Counselor Seiler.
I'll say thank you for the nomination and thank you for thinking I can do this. We'll see. I had a great discussion with the town manager today. We're budget season is here and we're ready and we're excited. And I'm looking forward to working with Ken and John. I think that this is going to be a really dynamic finance committee. And so let's do this, I guess.
All right. Tony, would you call the roll, please?
Counselor Seiler,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Pucci.
Yes. Thank you. Next is item 4, a non-action item, which is really the reason that we're all here today. And it's a joint presentation on the proposed fiscal year 2023 municipal and school budget. And now I get to shut up for a while and listen to Tom and Mr. Bruno talk about the budget. Jeff, okay. And I'm assuming that Liam's going to be able to pull up anything that's needed.
I'm hoping so. So while Liam's pulling it up, perhaps I'll provide a few introductory remarks. Tonight is the kickoff for the budget season. The charter is very clear and I think intentionally gives the responsibility to me to propose a budget. And I believe that's the rationale for that is that I'm closest to the operation, have a sense of what resources are needed to be able to meet the needs of our community. But really after tonight, it becomes your budget. And we have developed, I think, a well-oiled process and machine to use our finance committee to do a very thorough review of that budget request. And in the end, you'll make the final decisions in terms of the budget priorities and funding levels. And then you turn it back to me to administer it for the balance of the year. So there's a bit of pomp and circumstance and ceremony associated with this kickoff, but it really is the superintendent, myself, and all of our collective teams kind of starting the conversation in a place where I think it needs to be. And inevitably, we look forward to the input from the community, certainly the Board of Education and the council, as we go through this together. And I think I can speak for Jeff. We certainly stand ready to support you as you evaluate the priorities. And I think we can provide the information you need to help make a very informed decision, I hope. So with that, okay. Pardon? I can do it. I just think it would be a better viewer experience if we had it. Paul's sitting home right now saying, I told you you'd miss me when I was gone, right? I'm fine with that. I'm at the pleasure of council.
Yeah, why don't we do this? While we're resolving some technical difficulties, we'll take a 5-minute break and see if we can figure it out. Oh, you want to email it here?
Why are you being so obstreperous?
All right, well, I'm going to call this meeting back to order, and we're going to jump right into the town manager and superintendent of schools presentation of the fiscal year 23 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of the overall budget and kind of the major components of it. You'll see we've broken it out into those major components. So on the town side, municipal, we're looking at the starting point for the conversation is about a 4.13% increase on the net basis. And incidentally, this is all net numbers. Education side, it's about a point higher at 5.3. County is remarkably coming in low this year. This is a point I do want to talk to the Finance Committee about. Just as an aside, the county is switching from a calendar year to a fiscal year. And so we have some decisions to make. There's a kind of a catch up 6 months, and we've got some options to consider there. So we'll come back to that. The capital budget, there's a fairly robust level of spending, particularly on the town side. The school is showing great restraint, it seems, this year. But we have some really exciting and interesting projects that we'd like to bring to the council and to the community. We'll talk about some of them in some detail in a moment. One category that's kind of new and I broke out just for emphasis, I'll say, is TIF revenues. This council's well aware over the last 4 or 5 months, a number of changes have been made in our 2 major TIF districts that have really been done so to increase the capture rate and also add flexibility in terms of how we use TIF revenues. So you see this year we have over $2 million of TIF revenues. And again, I have a further slide in the presentation that talks about how we're putting that money to use. And then other is a catch-all. There's a little footnote there to know what goes into that. And all of this relates back to the tax rate comp sheet, which is something that the students of this process are fairly accustomed with. So that's a very quick overview, and we'd like to kind of go into a little more detail. So next slide, please. For the town side, I guess what emerged as a theme, we didn't start with this, but it became apparent. I'm calling it responding to community needs. We had the very unique opportunity of having a community survey that gave us feedback and insight, really like we don't have in a typical year. And some of that guidance, my senior staff really took to heart in my suggestion and request. And not surprisingly, we did see a number of priorities being extended and some new priorities, again, largely, at least in part, shaped by some of that feedback from the community. I will say none of these projects are really out of the ordinary. There's the sorts of things that we've been doing, but it's really gratifying to get community feedback that these are things that they want to see more of. So really quickly, we're looking to refresh our townwide transportation study. It's about 10 years old. This is an issue that comes up time and time again, and it's long overdue. That was something that was loud and clear through this survey. Sidewalks, maintenance, and construction. We've got a couple of really exciting projects we'll talk about in the capital plan for new sidewalk sections in town. And then we're embarking on a 10-year plan to maintain what we have and also provide winter maintenance in a better, more consistent fashion. We're redoubling our efforts for road resurfacing. So this is the typical paving. And our philosophy is let's keep good roads good. Let's not let them deteriorate to the point that they need full reconstruction. Another comment we heard through the survey is residents were looking for more visibility of our police department, particularly in the neighborhoods. And we've made some kind of low cost, no cost changes in operations. But the best way to do it is put more boots on the ground. And we're proposing 2 new patrol officers to really enhance that visibility townwide, but also the neighborhoods. And then there's a lot of conversation, an ongoing conversation around community center. We've not invested any resources to speak of. We've had tremendous work at the staff level, I think, and committee level with council involvement. But I think it's time, if we're serious about considering this, that we engage some professionals to help us better understand and define what we're talking about. So there's some resources in here. And again, that was one of the major takeaways. We didn't ask the question, but that was one of the things that came out loud and clear through the comments section of the survey. So that's just a quick overview and what I would characterize as kind of the theme of the municipal side of the budget. Next, please. Really quickly, it might be helpful just to kind of understand what are the major drivers in our budget, kind of those change factors that are really driving some of the increases. Some of this is a broken record, and you'll hear it from the superintendent as well. Health insurance is a big part of our budget. There's no question about that. And
looking at history gives us some suggestion of what to provide for in terms of potential increases. We'll know these numbers by the time we get to the end of this process, but at this point we don't. So we need to carry a number and we'll adjust accordingly. As I said earlier, we have some new staff investments in public safety. Just advance it again, please. So two in police, and then there's 4 fire positions. And we'll get into great detail, I'm sure, at the finance committee level, but given the nature of their 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shifts, one firefighter doesn't do you any good. You need to be able to cover all shifts. And so it comes in increments of 4, basically, to really make any noticeable difference. And then lastly, no surprise, we all see it in our household budgets, energy and fuel increases. And that's just a general comment across really many of the lines, just general inflationary pressures. We feel it just like the household budget does. So all of that totals up to about $750,000 alone, and there's certainly other major other items as well, and a lot of decision points along the way. But these are things that will certainly change over the next 6 weeks, and as we get better information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Superintendent, and he's going to take you through the school side, and I'll pick back up after.
Thanks, Tom. And I just wanted to share my thanks to Tom as town manager. It's been, this is my first budget cycle here in Scarborough. It's been just a wonderful experience and very collaborative. And there's so much sharing that goes on among departments in the town. And that's been super valuable to us as a school department, particularly in the areas of technology and maintenance and everything else. And so it's really been impressive, actually. I've been very impressed with the degree of collaboration and the focus on students and on kids. I think it's probably, you've probably heard this enough that, the last 2 years, all of the unanticipated and unprecedented challenges we've faced in trying to educate our kids and also live our lives and stay employed and go through all the disruptions of the last couple of years has been extremely challenging in every town. I've just been so impressed with how Scarborough has responded as a community. I've been, the passion and dedication from our staff, from our students, from our parents. Sometimes it feels like you're building the plane as you're flying it, right? And we went from, okay, we have an entire district, K to 12, every single school, and we can't use our buildings. So we have to learn how to educate kids remotely and off campus completely, almost at a drop of a hat. We had to do that. And then we had to transition to a hybrid model, massive organizational change where kids are either fully remote or part remote and part in person. And then finally, we were able to open our doors and open our schools again this fall and return to fully in-person instruction with all of the additional health and safety measures and changes in protocols and all of those things. So that those are 3 pretty massive organizational shifts inside of a 2-year period. And that doesn't happen well unless you have that degree of collaboration and just professionalism and just straight up hard work. So the people that I've met and the community just really just kind of rolls up their sleeves and makes sure that we can do the best for our kids. So as far as our overall budget drivers, this is a pretty unique, continues to be a pretty unique budget cycle for schools. Some of the things that we're looking at is continuing to maintain our health and safety of students, staff, and community, and really focusing on that. We're in kind of recovery mode. So we already have a lot of data to suggest that having the kids back in person with their teachers and with staff over the course of this year has been hugely impactful. So we've also had to navigate a lot of changes in the SOP and CDC recommendations, all of those things. We've been able to follow that and keep kids in school throughout the entirety of this year and leading into next year. We need to continue to lead through this. As far as the budget side of things, We also, over the course of the last couple of years, have had a huge infusion of federal funds. That's basically the spigot is being turned off. So we've got to figure out how to kind of take some of that money and move it. And then also not have this funding cliff where all of a sudden we've got to start cutting positions. So some of the things that we're really looking at is some of the economic impacts of the pandemic. So we've had some staff shortages and hiring challenges. All of these things have really driven how we've built this budget. So and then also we're continuing to work on things that are critical to our kids and staff, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, social, emotional learning of kids, as well as ongoing curriculum work and professional development of our staff. So next slide. Another thing that I was particularly impressed with at all of our schools is the degree to which our principals and building leadership and staff really not just look at what they need, but what they may not need. And then how can we best use our resources to meet our needs, our changing needs as they evolve. So I wanted to start with this slide just as an example of the degree of specificity that our leadership council goes through line by line. And where can we save to make sure that we're using that funds to directly impact our students and support of our students. So just some examples: 200,000 for textbook and instructional subscriptions that no longer need to get renewed, 13,000 for supplemental instructional supplies. These are just examples of things that if you don't go line by line, you can miss, and that money adds up and can help fund additional supports that you may need in other areas. So if you go to the next slide. What we're looking for this year in terms of support for kids, and again, this is about really focusing on supporting the needs of our kids, both socially and emotionally and academically. The two very much go hand in hand. So a new student support academic educational technician 3 position at the middle school, a new study center educational technician position at the high school, 2 social worker positions, 1 at the middle school and 1 at Wentworth, and then 2 additional special education service ed tech positions to support incoming K students. And then we're also looking at, and this is another example of significant collaboration with the town. We're looking at coming up with a more efficient and effective way of scheduling all of our facilities across the district. It will require some additional work from our current secretary and support for our athletics and activities. And then adding unified bocce to the high school athletics program. And I don't know if anyone's experienced a unified game either at our middle school or high school. I actually got to play in one, which was pretty fun. But it will just, it's amazing. The program is so important, and the experience it gives our kids 100% translates into their development in the classroom and their experience in school. It's really pretty amazing to watch and to be a part of. The other piece of this is and this is in the executive summary too, a really clear breakdown of all the federal COVID grant monies, how they were spent, and then building in that contingency so that we're able to continue to fund into this budget some positions so that it's not having to cut 10 positions in 1 year, and really kind of step down and then really assess, okay, what do our kids need, and making sure that we have the resources and that we're using the resources from the federal government through the COVID grants and those funds to make sure that we're supporting the needs of our kids. So there are some things in this budget that are funded through the remains or what's left over of the ESSER 3 funding for teacher positions to continue to maintain small class sizes as part of our kind of recovery and getting back to more normal operations as a school department, a more normalized operations anyway. A full guidance counselor for the K-2 schools, summer academies in July and August, again, to provide additional support for students, specialized reading instructions for special services, and then a supplemental one-to-one educational technician for incoming kindergartner needs. And again, that has to do with students who are already working with CDS before they're of school age. And then as you know, Tom was describing, we have the costs of doing business and of keeping the personnel and programs that we have in place moving forward. We're in negotiations for the teachers, which is our largest contractual and CBA negotiations, so that's a big number. And then as Tom mentioned earlier, our budgeted health increase, that's not the number, that's the highest it could be. So we're budgeting for the health insurance increase. And then we also, special services, the 2 additional social workers and 2 educational technicians necessary to meet our special services and special needs requirements. Increases in instructional technology. One of the things that came out of our remote and hybrid models is a significant investment in technology for all of our students K through 12. And you're going to continue to maintain that technology and maintain that investment. And then, anyone who's filled their oil tank recently knows the energy and fuel costs are a challenge. Next slide. And then as Tom noted as the first part of his slides, and we'll continue talking about it, the total education general fund operating budget, the percent change is 6.20, 6.40 increase in the total educational budget. We do have an increase in non-tax revenues, which brings in the tax request at 5.31%. And that's the school side. Thank you.
This is in part, I guess, the Mutual Admiration Society. I was just gratified by hearing Jeff's comments just about the collaboration. I've been here long enough to have maybe taken that for granted, and it's just great to hear an outside perspective kind of reinforcing that what we do here in Scarborough is really quite unique, and it doesn't happen at this level in many other communities, if any. So we just forget about that when we're so close to it sometimes. So thank you for making mention of that. From the capital side, I didn't want to bore you with all the particulars. This is a big part of our conversation, I hope, with the Finance Committee, and we'll go into great detail. What I thought I'd do is just kind of show you kind of the fruits of some of the labor over the last few years. So we've got a fairly substantial capital request, just about 13 million in total. A number of these projects are not going to be new to you. They've kind of been coming through the planning process in one form or another. But what really the takeaway I want to leave you with tonight is that we're starting to find different ways to fund these, whereas historically it was almost all bonding. And to be fair, a fair amount of that still is, 9 million of that. But we've been able to build equipment reserves on the school side last year, and the town has a modest reserve. Those monies are now coming back into play, and you can see $700,000 are coming from different reserves. We're also trying to convert and be smarter about what we bond. We do have a fiscal and financial policy that helps us understand what should be capital, what should be funded through long-term borrowing, and what should we pay for as we go. So there's a fairly substantial amount to be appropriated because of the type of item it is or project it is, and its life expectancy and overall cost. And lastly, and we'll go into a little more detail, is there's a fair amount of ARPA funds, about $1.5 million in ARPA funds that we're proposing to bring into this budget. And in a slide or two, I'll dive in a little deeper on that. In fact, the next one, if you would. So the town was allocated, I guess, just over $2.2 million, and that was based on a nationwide formula, population based, as I recall. We've gone through trials and tribulations with the US Treasury, finally issuing a final rule. So we now have clear guidance, and there's there's some runtime on this. We have a better sense of claiming the funds, and that's been made much easier, and also how we can put them to use. It's very tempting to use these funds because we could to supplant existing operating costs. But it's one-time money, and we're just kind of setting ourselves up for a challenge in the future. So I'm proposing that we really look at one-time expenditures really in the capital side of the budget. And my proposal, I should mention that this council has already approved about $400,000 in that allocation, that going for premium pay for essential workers, and then also more recently some voting booth upgrades that the clerk desperately needs. For FY23, we're proposing the purchase of 2 new ambulances. We think there's a very good connection, and it's certainly qualified for use. We're also proposing to fund a major new project. This would be construction of a sidewalk on a portion of Spurwink Road. It's kind of the first phase. That's a $890,000 item. I think will be should be well received in the community. And when we relocated the message board from the old public safety building to a brand new sign out front, and it, within 2 months of putting it in, it broke down. We can't repair it. So we'd like to repair that. I think that would be well used for general community use, but also town and school activities and making notice of public meetings and so on and so forth. So I think it's something desperately needed. I just want to loop back to the ambulances. Our historical practice has been to use EMS revenues for all of our ambulance runs to cover these capital expenses. The 2 years of the pandemic really, at least the first year, significantly reduced our revenues. Folks simply weren't calling for service. They probably still needed it, but they were afraid to go to the hospital, and consequently, we were caught up in that same sort of fear. And so I think those practices and those revenues will rebound as soon as this year. And in fact, this year looks very promising. But that's left us with a position where we don't have additional funds to be able to make this capital purchase. So I think we'll be able to cycle back to that traditional method as soon as that gets back on track. So I think that's I guess another reason where we see ARPA funds being really a good use. It kind of bridges a gap for us. Next, please. The other thing I just wanted to highlight, it's a new and different thing. I made mention early on, this council is quite aware of the changes you've made to our major TIFs in town. That is already producing significant additional revenue in the TIF account. And the difference with TIF revenues is they are limited in terms of what you can use them for, as opposed to simply coming in as general tax revenue, unrestricted for use. It's at your convenience. These have fairly stringent regulations as to where they can be spent, and I credit the council for being thoughtful and being as flexible as we can in that regard. As these, particularly the downtown TIF, as that picks up and accumulates more and more funds, I think we're going to have even more and more opportunities. In this year, I'm proposing a fairly simple approach that will cover the funds we expect for next year. So for the Hargis Parkway TIF, we need to satisfy our final credit enhancement payment to New England Expedition. That will be done next year. And then the remainder, we're proposing to go directly against the debt service, which happens to be its final debt service payment in FY23 as well. Won't cover all of it, but we'll cover about half of it at this point. And then we'll have time to pay ourselves back for the deficit that's been created. On the downtown TIF, we are proposing to cover half of the public safety building debt. That was one of the allowed uses that we've included. And we're looking to cover the entirety of SETCO costs. This is something that we've always had available to us. We've never chosen to. We now have the resources to be actually able to do that. We'll get into some particulars if the Finance Committee wants to, but in FY23, these are dollars that we were already spending in our budget. Because of the way these programs work, the tax shift benefits will accrue 2 and 3 years from now. So I can't say that we're not enjoying the benefits in FY '23, but we've set up the system for that to be coming our way. And it was important, I think, to begin the practice of doing this on a regular basis. The final point I'll just remind the council of, you self-imposed a requirement that all TIF expenditures will be done through the budget process. And so it's done in the course of a larger conversation about the entire priorities as opposed to individually throughout the year. So I think that was a very wise move, and I expect you'll see a consistent conversation from this podium in the years future. Next, please. Items in motion, and to save Jeff from standing up, I'll just cover his as well. We have some new staff investments. We can survive without them. So those, I'll characterize them in motion. We would very much like to have a deliberate, thoughtful talk about the value of that investment. The assessor wanted to be true to his words and has monies in his budget to start the in-house revaluation. He has an exhibit that actually recommends that we delay that a year, but I thought it was important to include that money in the budget so we can have that conversation. And then I think on the revenue side, excise, I'm being very cautious. I have not increased this has been the juggernaut for the entire time I've been here. It's increased year over year, and it may well again. But it strikes me with some of the challenges with getting new automobiles. I think we're going to see not as many new cars being purchased in this calendar year, and that will affect excise revenues. On the other side, all the new residents that have moved into our town, they're registering their car here for the first time, and maybe 2 or 3 cars. So I may, that's some good news, I suspect, and I'll look for your collective guidance in kind of reading the tea leaves and understanding where that might be. But I think there's some extra revenue there, and it's a discussion point we ought to have. And then for revenue sharing, we noticed that the formula that the state uses is using a 2019 population estimate. Well, we all know that there's now 2020 actual census data, and Karen Martin has been kind enough to wade into this a bit, and we're taking the issue up with the state to see if it just doesn't make sense that they won't use the best information available. That one change would increase about $300,000 to us if they simply use the updated estimate, which they have used countless times in other formulas. So I don't know if we'll be successful, but we're going to continue to pursue that. And then on the school side, as was mentioned, I think all the collective bargaining agreements are open, and so there are resources a bit, included in the budget to cover the financial component of those, however they settle out. Anthem rates, health rates, as was mentioned. And then, of course, the enrollment in special services, that's something that can change day to day, as I understand it. And so that's something that we'll look for them to keep us advised. We need to be ready and able to serve the needs of the kids when they present themselves. So the bottom line, the net budget is up 7.4%. Luckily, we continue to have very robust growth in our valuation. The council has a policy which simply takes 90% as a baseline, 90% of the increase from last year. But it also gives me, the manager, the opportunity to do something different if there's a valid reason I'm doing something different. So we're about a $118 million increase over last year. Coincidentally, that's about the same increase, so it's about 100%. And I have a pretty high degree of confidence. The assessor has been very helpful in helping me understand those different components. So I'm confident in including that as part of my recommendation as part of this evaluation. And so all of that results in a projected mill rate increase of about 4.8%. Of course, your goal is at 3%. And next slide, just very quickly, I think history is the best indicator. This is just a 10-year look back. I would note, I would ask you to focus on the right-hand column, and I would note the years 2019 and 2020 ought to really be thrown out. That was the 2 years of the reval. So I don't think those are very good indicators. But if you look back at history and the more recent history, we've been hovering right around 1% for the last 2 years. So I have no doubt that we'll, if it's the council's will, we'll be able to meet your budget goal. But hopefully only after we have robust discussion and deliberation around the priorities. And a couple final ones, just in terms of how to stay engaged as we go through this process. We will have a communications plan, much like we did the last couple of years. And that layers in a bunch, it really leverages all of our resources, our partnership and opportunity with the leader, also our e-newsletter, which comes out on a weekly basis at this point, and then all of our other resources as well. We are in a position of still doing hybrid meetings, so I think anyone who has an interest in attending and participating in our meetings can from the convenience of their home or their office. And I kindly put both the council and the BOE's email addresses should they have any questions. By all means, myself and staff are available as well. This budget and of course my presentation here will be available starting first thing in the morning and through the budget portal. And lastly is just kind of the process that as it lays out over the next 6 weeks or so. So obviously tonight we start the process. School board will do its own adoption process, including first reading, public hearing, and second reading. The council has its as well. That starts next Wednesday on the 6th. We'll be convening a joint meeting of the school board and the town council on May 4th. And all of that culminates in the school validation vote on June 14th. At your places this evening, you had a budget book. Our school colleagues were each supplied one as well. I won't spend the time to kind of go through and orient it. Hopefully it's fairly self-explanatory. If not, we do try to provide a fair amount of content, both narrative to provide the context for you, but also the entire line item detail for both town and school is there should you want to look at that level of detail. And I have no doubt that the Finance Committee will do its part to dig deep and ask lots of questions. And I suspect they're very interested in having anyone attend those meetings, be part of that proceeding if you wish. So we stand ready and I hopefully able to assist you as you go through this journey.
Thank you, guys. That was great. And just to be clear, this will be available electronically
Yes.
on the town's website tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd prefer not copying it for people, so please view it.
Me as well. If anybody needs a copy, I have one available. So I wanted to reiterate one of your slides there that showed, 4 years ago, we had a 0% tax increase. 3 years ago, it was -10. It was 1% increase 2 years ago and then 1% last year. So having been here all those years, this is one of the better starting points that I can recall being proposed in terms of the impact to the taxpayer. So I think we're at a good starting point. And I'm hopeful that we set some goals or objectives as a council that we'll be able to land squarely well within what we put forth. Jeff, you mentioned some of the transitions and adaptations that the council, and you made me feel guilty. So I was complaining earlier today about sitting in a new seat. I don't have Paul to run the computers, and at the flip of a switch, you're all of a sudden trying to educate 3,000 students without a classroom. And so I'm humbled now. So, that's quite impressive. Any questions for Tom or Jeff? Councilor Hamel.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. And I'll direct these to Tom if I may. So first of all, thanks for the work, and this is an enormous task that you make it look easy. We know it's not. And this is my 4th time through the budget process. So it's every year it's learn something new. Can you tell us, were there any special assumptions you and the school have taken in view of what appears to be some storm clouds on the economic horizon concerning inflation, concerning a downturn of the business cycle, and so forth? Is there anything that you can point to that has guided your budget work this year to take into account those things?
I mentioned it in passing. I think the excise revenue is a watch area because I think that's very sensitive to consumer behavior. Beyond that, many of our revenue sources, certainly the state revenue sources, they are experiencing record both sales and income tax receipts to the extent that they're returning significant money back to taxpayers. And so That appears to be fairly stable revenue source for us. Our revenue sources are extremely stable. Property values luckily aren't affected by these kind of short-term economic factors. Long-term, they may have a bit of a tailing effect, but that's certainly nothing that we need to worry about for next year. In terms of inflationary factors, I think we have taken that into account, and our requests, appropriation requests, do reflect what we anticipate in the coming 12 months.
Great, thank you. Number 2 of 3 questions. It was a process question. So I'm looking at the calendar and I'm trying to get my head around, I seem to recall that we had fairly extensive departmental reviews at one point in time. When and where will there be an opportunity for the public and also for the council to have those reviews?
Certainly. If I could direct your attention to page 20 of the book. This is a tentative schedule. I already know from meeting with Mrs. Seiler today that we're going to have to modify some things. So I think we'll do that fairly quickly as soon as the first meeting next week. And with a revised schedule, we'll make certain to get the public aware of what that schedule is and publish it. So these are all public proceedings, and the public and councilors are encouraged to come and be part of that process.
So am I correct in saying that most of that will take place in the finance committee meetings, not in a town council meeting or a special workshop?
Correct. That's been the historical practice, that the finance committee really runs that detailed review process for the council and produces typically a series of recommended adjustments at the end of that process.
Okay. And the final question, 3 of 3 is, forgive me if I can't quote the number, but I seem to recall that we have an obligation and maybe a financial policy requirement or someplace in the charter to maintain a certain unrestricted fund balance. You've got a slide on this on page 18. So can you confirm for us what the requirement is and how successful we've been or not in terms of achieving that?
Yeah, I believe you're referencing the kind of self-imposed, no other entity has a requirement. We've created some internal requirements in large part because it's good, prudent finance, but it also helps our bond rating to show healthy fund balances. Essentially, we cannot dip below 8.33%, but there's aspirational goals at 10% and 12%. And when we attain those certain goals, there's certain further instructions as to what to do with the additional fund balance at that point.
Okay, so my final question on that is, so if you look at the bar chart, we did pretty well, in terms of keeping that number down through 2011 through 2016. We were, over the limit on 2017, and the past, 3 or 4 years, it's been kind of hovering. So my question is there anything we're going to do specifically to try to get that number back to where it
Well,
should be?
let's keep in mind, fund balance is created because we've raised more money. We haven't spent all the money that we've raised. And so this is taxpayer money. So yes, it's good to have a healthy fund balance, but I think too much is not appropriate. So we don't take any specific actions to build fund balance. We don't budget it. It's a function of our annual budget performance. And so one of the reasons that I think that we haven't been able to make great strides in fund balance is that we have pretty tight budgets, and those margins are fairly limited at the end of the year. And so, no, we don't have any specific strategies to build fund balance.
And there was no opportunity to use ARPA or COVID funding for this.
No, in fact, that was an absolute prohibition. That was crystal clear, very tempting. Everyone would have just tucked it away for a rainy day. And explicitly, that's not allowed.
You never know if you don't ask.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. More to your point, we do have the audit that is, ready to be shared with you. So we'll look to schedule with leadership that session. I think that will be an opportunity to get into a much deeper level of fund balance discussion. Thank you.
Any other questions? See that we have some of the school board here. Do you guys have any questions or comments? Appreciate you all coming. Okay. Thank you. Well, with that, I think that concludes today's meeting. If there's no objections, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.